It only took 3 years, but I think Mark Scheifele might have finally broken his own curse against the Toronto Maple Leafs. Find out how on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return because new customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Now, like I mentioned earlier, the Jets had a very big game earlier this afternoon. One of the rare afternoon games the Jets have played in the middle of the week. Bit of a strange one. You don't often see a 2 p.m. start time. I suppose as somebody who records in the evenings, I appreciate it at least. But for the broad majority of hockey-watching public, it's a little bit of an odd time. And I know Christmas Eve is tomorrow, but all the same, a bit of a strange one. But hey, you know what? Maybe a weekday mid-afternoon game against Toronto would be just the antidote for what the Jets needed to break one of the dumbest curses in this recent franchise's history. 3 years ago, we all remember Mark Scheifele talking about how great it was to beat the Toronto Maple Leafs. And then after that happened, the Jets proceeded to lose pretty much every single game against Toronto. In fact, I think we had maybe 1 or 2 wins at most, if that, during the streak. But apparently our new national nightmare is finally over. Mark Scheifele decided tonight was the night that he was just going to go ham. The top line was going to show up, and we were going to finally put to bed one of the stupidest curses possible. I don't even know how this happened. And look, a curse is illusory for the most part, but by the same token, karma tends to bite Winnipeg sometimes in the very weirdest ways, and not being able to beat Toronto has been one of them. You remember earlier the Jets were, coming into the game against Toronto at the start of the season with a nearly perfect record, and I think we were, that was our first loss of the whole season, and Toronto fans kind of ate that up for a good few weeks. So nice to finally get hopefully a closing of that chapter. And I know Toronto fans will say something about, doesn't count. Matthews was out. And it's like, have you seen the Jets lineups that have often gone against Toronto the last few years? Let's be real, right? The Jets have also had pretty significant injuries. And even in this game, we were still down Dylan Samberg, which is pretty rough. And then part of the way through, Fleury also went down. By the way, that looks like a really bad injury. I'm no surgeon, but the way that he went down, clutching his knee and basically hobbling off the ice looked pretty rough. He got caught up and tangled and, fell down, landed pretty hard. And I don't know if he tore something, but I'm going to guess he's going to be missing out for at least a couple of games, probably longer. I guess the one positive for him, at least, is that, thankfully it happened right at the holiday break, so he can hopefully, get some time off and rest. But it is also really sucky that this happened right before the holidays. I'm sure that he was looking forward to spending time with his family. And, now he's going to do some sort of testing, probably some medical leave and stuff. So it's just really unfortunate that it happened, during the holiday break and not like, say, the February international break. Not that getting injured is good at any point, but certainly when you want to have time with your family and stuff, this is just a sucky time of year to have it happen. And I know Hayden has really, pulled double duty, so it just sucks to see him get hurt like that. That was very unfortunate. For the impact on this game, I will say Toronto had a good start and was dominating early, and then the Jets had a power play and things really started to turn. After that, the Jets kind of warmed up to the task, and I thought Winnipeg put on a pretty great game against a tough Leafs team that even without Matthews is still pretty venomous. You've still got Marner. Tavares has been resurgent this year. Nylander is as crazy as ever. But what really seemed to turn the initial tide was Kyle Connor getting his 20th goal of the season, a power play goal, and it just featured the same kind of beautiful movement that we're almost a little accustomed to, right? It's almost boring to talk about how good the power play is. The Jets special teams in this respect is truly league leading for a reason. The top power play units, puck movement, rebound opportunities, finishing, it's just immaculate. There's a reason it's like at 32%. And so, just really impressive power play, all the kind of hallmarks of an elite unit, and really one of the big driving forces for Winnipeg's success, even during their downturns in the 5v5 play. That power play is something that you can just trust almost implicitly. There's never really a worry about it. Even when Ehlers went down and they definitely declined in effectiveness, eventually they still managed to find a way to turn it around and create some great opportunities. So great to see it firing on all four cylinders again. And then the top line after that, especially from the second period on, just went to work. In fact, I really feel like the top line was only held back by the Fleury pairing when they were on the ice. That's when the Jets tended to get pinned in their own end for long stretches. But once, the other pairings were on the ice, I thought the top line was able to really create, and they had some astoundingly good goals. Scheifele had a great cross slot pass on a 2-on-1 counter. The trailing defender that eventually called up to Connor just wasn't quite in time, and it ended up being a beautiful finish from Connor. Very well earned goal. Great assist from Scheifele. But somehow that wasn't even the most impressive assist that we'd see this evening. Gabriel Velarde had another crazy assist to Scheifele. This one, I don't even know how Gabriel even got this across. It went through like two skaters, something like that, and found Scheifele right there for a perfect tip-in. Just a fantastic goal-scoring opportunity off of a great pass. Scheifele scored again later in the third period. Then he was able to create or complete his hat trick. We had two hat tricks possible in this game. We only got one, but if there was going to be somebody who was going to get it, it probably had to be Scheifele, right? Mark, as the progenitor and originator of the curse against Toronto, how fitting was it that he was the one to close that chapter? Or what I hope is closed. Lord knows we may end up eating those words a little bit later this season, but on the whole, fantastic performance from the team, and just a really good win after, another victory that we'll talk about from this past weekend against Minnesota. But I think this game was an even better test for the Jets because it's on the road. You're in a very hostile environment. Toronto has been pretty good this year. Some ups and downs, and obviously Matthews' injury history the past couple of weeks has been a problem. But make no mistake, for all of Toronto's issues, they are still a very powerful, very dangerous team, and probably one of the toughest the Jets have played the past couple of weeks. Their up-tempo, speedy game causes teams a lot of problems, and despite their kind of middling form, their style of hockey has just been, in many seasons, a real problem for the Jets. This game, Winnipeg, I thought, did pretty well. Especially big props to Ville Heinola, who stood up and took on some big shifts. I thought that he and Miller played one of their best games together. And Heinola was on the ice for a lot of good. He had some big stretch passes. I think one of them led to a goal eventually. And, compared to some of his earlier performances, just a really strong game from him. He's now probably going to have to carry some big defensive responsibilities with Fleury likely sidelined for a bit. Sandberg's not going to start skating until the weekend. Stanley's probably out for at least another couple of games, or maybe one or two games. So with all that said, Heinola may be our number two left defender, unless they do the Miller Pionk pairing that we saw for part of this game. But I would suspect they're going to try guys on their natural side. So we'll have to wait and see how that goes. But yeah, big win, finally vanquishing an old demon. Glad the Jets were able to do it. And that was their 25th win of the season. 36 games in, 25 wins, back into the 70s in points percentage. What a huge victory for Winnipeg, and, firmly putting them back in the conversation of one of the stronger teams. After that really bad road trip, they're now 7-2-1 in their last 10, and some of the 5v5 play has started to pick up too. So that is really, really welcome, and a huge performance from the top line. Speaking of which, the last game, maybe the top line went quiet, but they were still very good. And a lot of the team's components all had great outings against the Minnesota Wild. We'll chat about what that game over the weekend was like in just a brief moment. But before we go any further, thought I would let you know about our friends and partners at PrizePicks. If you love sports, you're going to love PrizePicks, the best place to turn your sports knowledge into real money. Whether it's hockey, football, or any of your other favorite sports, PrizePicks makes it easy to get in on the action. You can now win up to 1,000 times your cash on PrizePicks. This holiday season, they're giving away $30 million in rewards during Picksmas, and they're offering 2 free picks in December. And when your picks hit, PrizePicks makes it easy to cash out. You can get your money in as little as 15 minutes. This upcoming weekend, I think, would be a great opportunity for you to have a lineup that includes Scheifele, Connor, Morrissey. These guys have started to turn up the heat again. And after a couple of scoreless outings, maybe the previous week against Anaheim and San Jose, I think you can expect them to have more than 2 points per player, probably more than 2 or 3 shots on goal. So I would expect, especially for the top line, to have really productive outings this weekend. But the only way that you can do this is to download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 instantly. PrizePicks, run your game. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us on today's episode as we're chatting about some really good stuff from Winnipeg these past couple of games. After the disappointments of the San Jose and Anaheim games, obviously I said, at the end of last week, the Jets really needed a big response. And boy, oh boy, have the past couple of games been a resounding turn in form for the Jets. Now, you could argue that maybe it's not going to last, and I certainly have time for that. But I think for the time being, the most important thing was to go into the holiday break with some really good vibes and really good play. And the Jets delivered in spades in both games. I guess if you were talking about which one was more technically proficient, the Minnesota Wild game over the weekend was really a complete 5-0 demolition and really suffocation of the Wild. Minnesota's coming in pretty banged up, a bit tired, and frankly, they've just been hitting a real skid the past couple of weeks. But this is still a tough team, and one that has given the Jets, despite maybe lopsided-looking scorelines, probably more of a hassle than you'd think. The last game that the Jets played, I think they won like 4-1. That game, I thought the scoreline flattered Winnipeg a bit. Minnesota was an absolute handful, and in this game, the Jets really didn't let that happen. They're facing Wallstedt, who's really one of the best goaltending prospects in the whole league, right there with Askarov. And, they made Wallstedt look pretty human. There was fantastic puck movement. The Jets got power play goals from Ehlers. They had some depth contributions from Barron and Nemesnikov. And Perfetti drops a 3-point night. Pionk also getting on the score sheet with a power play goal himself. That's one where Perfetti actually had an assist. And, compared to the top line having, carried a lot of the even strength goals, at least for the past couple of weeks, it was great to see some of the depth lines finally get back in. The fourth line, recently has kind of struggled. Same with the third line at times. But, here again, Barron creates an opportunity and cashes in after Iafallo and Lowry go to work down low. Creates a good rebound, Barron tucks it home, and just a good hard-working goal. But I think it's probably worth spotlighting Perfetti's performance in particular. Again, Cole, I think, has maybe been a little snake-bitten at times this year, but his, opportunistic goal late in the third period, early in the third period, where, there was a turnover right into the slot, Minnesota passing from the half wall right into the slot. Perfetti's there. He makes a great read, jumps on the puck, and just rips it right home. Beautiful goal, exactly what you want to see. And then having a couple of nice passes and assists later in the game, but also still remaining a presence on the forecheck. The growth of Perfetti this year, I think, continues to showcase why I'm very high on him, why he remains one of my big, breakout candidates for the season. And so far, things have been looking pretty good. He is, he's got 23 points in 36 games. That is very impressive for this really being like arguably his second real full season of NHL duty, and the first where he's starting to get into like second line minutes. I think I said at the start of the year that I thought he could have like a 50 or 60 point year, and I felt like it was pretty achievable for him, maybe even likely, given how good he's been the past, couple of seasons in very limited minutes. And he's on pace for 52 points. I think that's actually going to be on the lower side. I think he'll probably finish closer to 60 by the end of the year. His, continued faith from the coaching staff and really the improved play all around in all zones just continues to showcase a really bright young player who I think has a load of talent. And in a game like this where, the Jets really as a team just outplayed Minnesota from the ground up, it's great to see a young talent like this really standing out positively. I have a lot of hopes for Perfetti. I think he's going to be a great player. And, his next contract is probably going to be a little bit on the expensive side. But, sometimes you've got to pay up to maintain and keep your talent. And I think that's where the Jets can really do some good. Also, really worth shouting out Hellebuyck. It is his fourth shutout. And after this game and the Leafs game, Hellebuyck is back in first. I don't know if he was ever really trailing at any point, but he's currently in first in save percentage, goals against average, which is not my favorite stat because it's, one of those that's a little context agnostic, but we'll take it for now. And, shutouts, wins, whatever it is that you want, Hellebuyck continues to be at the forefront of everything. Helly, I think you really want to take a moment and appreciate the performance that he's had, between this season and last. He has put up the best years of his career ever, and somehow this year he's actually better than he was last year. He's saving even more above expectation. He's putting up just absolutely insane numbers. League average for goaltending, I think, has got to be around like a 900 this year because it's not been great goaltending across the board. But somehow Helly is at like a 926, 927, just utterly bonkers numbers. The only other person who's close is Stolarz, who's tied with him in save percentage, but Stolarz has also won and played considerably less than Helly has. So just an incredible year from Hellebuyck, very clearly the odds-on favorite from the Vezina. And at this point, I really do feel like it's Hellebuck's to lose. He's been on an unholy tear. We are seeing his best hockey of his career, and I just can't wait to see him really translate that into the playoffs. It's been the one thing that's maybe been a bit of a problem for him, and I don't know that it's always his fault, right? Hellebuyck has had some games where he's been not great in the postseason, but I think the team in front of him has often let him down. Last year's Jets against Colorado were terrible, so, I don't really know that I hold it that much against him. But when he's been called upon this year, what a incredible goalie he's been this year, and what a blessing it is to watch him wearing a Jets uniform. In a game in which he's only going to face 19 shots and Minnesota was generally outplayed, it's sometimes hard to stay focused, but again, he gets his fourth shutout, league leading, 19 clean saves. And in, the game against Toronto, even more impressive. He had a couple of fantastic stops today. Connor Dewar came in close on a breakaway. He made that save. He had another shocking toe save. I don't even know who it was that came down the slot for Toronto and had a very clean look. And I thought for sure it was going to be a goal. A bit of a defensive breakdown, but he made a fantastic toe save, kicked it to the side, and kept the Jets in the lead. So, man, what a year it's been. If he can somehow parlay that into a deep playoff run, this team is really cooking with gas and could go very far on the incredible performance alone that he's been putting up this year. And again, you're never sure that it's going to last, and you don't know how many years of this you're getting in the future. But I'll tell you one thing. I was going to be very sick if he left the Jets. I could not imagine him wearing another jersey. I know I always say this, but man, what it has been to see him, doing stuff like this against Toronto, against Minnesota, really all of these teams game in and game out for the Jets. It is a privilege, and I hope it lasts for a long time. Other stuff from this game, it's hard to really pick out much other than just nice to see the depth lines getting rewarded, the top line having another strong game, even if they didn't really figure on the score sheet too much. Nice to see Ehlers get a power play goal. He's kind of been a little up and down since coming back. You can still see he's rusty, still getting to grips with his line mates again. I still feel like, when you're looking at that second line, that 2C role still seems like a huge gap. The Jets are going to have some bigger holes to fill, and we'll talk a little bit later about how they might play that, because I think, depending on what you want to do at the trade deadline this year or even before then, I mentioned it on another episode, but the Jets have a pretty wide field of possibilities. And for Winnipeg, this feels like a year where you really want to take a swing. I think the Jets are in a prime position to do some real damage. And while you might feel comfortable, resting on the team's laurels and hoping the regular season performance continues into the postseason, we've seen how that hasn't always translated. And I think the Jets are flush with enough assets to really make a run of it this year and to have a ton of fun. I never thought that the Jets would be competing for a President's Trophy right now. That's the current race that they're in. And I know that we always worry about the second half collapse. Again, I really don't know that this team is going to have that. But, I just enjoy it for as long as it lasts. I think that's always the takeaway, but hope that it keeps going on. We may not see a Jennings Trophy this year, but I will happily exchange that for a deep playoff run. And I think that is very possible this year if the Jets play their cards right. But we'll chat about how that might play out here in a few months in just a little bit. Before we go too much further, though, did want to let you know about our friends and partners at FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action one last time with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W. I love betting on players that I think will score a touchdown and how many points I think each of these teams are going to score. It's great. For the Ravens on Christmas, I'm expecting a big game. I think we could see potentially, like a 3-touchdown performance from Lamar Jackson, maybe a Mark Andrews touchdown, maybe a Deontay Johnson fumble or something. I'm not rooting against him necessarily, but we might be a little bit petty here in Baltimore. Let me know who you're interested in tracking though for some of these games. It's going to be a great outing for Wednesday football, but the only way that you can get in on the FanDuel action is to visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Hey friends, welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are chatting just very briefly about some interesting expectations and kind of what to hope for from the next few months of Jets hockey. Winnipeg has really gotten itself into a very good position, and I think we've also seen that they have room for continued growth. You see really inspiring games like this against Minnesota and Toronto, and then you see games against maybe San Jose and Anaheim, and you're like, all right, maybe the Jets still have some room for growth. Maybe there are still some things that they can improve and fix before they get to the postseason, which it's totally cool. I was maybe a little angrier last week, considering I thought the efforts just really weren't good enough. I know the Jets did get a couple of wins in the previous outings, but I feel like Minnesota and Toronto were much better proxies for what I want to see this team do going forward, right? If you can generally play well at 5v5, have your special teams do enough to keep you in it, which in Winnipeg's case is more than enough because the power play is just absolutely insane, then you've got a pretty good run through the rest of the season. The Jets are already at 51 points. They could go 500 and still fairly be, comfortably be in a playoff spot heading forward. They've recovered their lead for the Central Division. And I think, the next 11 games, they've got 10 at home, something along those lines. And these are going to be some, division opponents. We're going to see Colorado very soon, once on the road, then we have them at home. We're going to see a lot of the Pacific Division, which for the Jets has usually been decent. I will say that, LA is a tough opponent, and we've got, a couple of dates with teams like the Kraken and Canucks who can hurt you, even if they may not look like the most threatening teams from their recent track record. But in here are also a couple of games against Nashville, Detroit, Anaheim, and these are all at home, so the Jets have a pretty sizable advantage. I think getting through January as safely and as cleanly as you can is really important because obviously, heading into February, middle of the month, you've got a tough one. Lots of road games at the end of January into February. Then you've got that international Four Nations face-off break. And then the back half of February is going to be, a couple of really tough road games. You've got St. Louis and Nashville. You've got all sorts of Eastern Conference opponents. Will be an interesting gauge to see how the Eastern Conference is. We've played, quite a few Western teams recently, but the East, I think, has a couple of really scary opponents that could be teams that the Jets would face in a proverbial Stanley Cup final. Obviously, a way long road to get to that point, but hey, you might as well start dreaming now while you can. But I think for the next couple of weeks at least, home cooking is where it's going to be at. Welcoming in 2025 with big wins against the West, I think would do fantastic wonders for a lot of us. We have kind of kicking off that slate of games this weekend, a big one against Ottawa. And I know Ottawa is going to feel like maybe the butt of the joke from the past couple of months, but Ottawa has really started to round into form recently. They're like 7-3 in their last 10 games. My apologies. I think they're actually 8-2, and they are finally getting Vezina caliber goaltending from Ullmark, which is going to make them a lot more dangerous because the goaltending and the PK were really two of the only things that Ottawa was missing. The offense and their chance creation has been very good. Their underlying metrics have generally been strong. Again, the goaltending and PK were really just the two issues, and at least one of those is seemingly fixed. So, very tough game. Big opportunity for the Jets to come out of the Christmas break with a huge victory, and then you kind of start this big December into January sprint against almost a good chunk of the toughest opponents that you're going to face in the Central. I know Nashville may seem like not that bad, but the Preds are just such a pain to play. And I think it's one of those things where even if they're not the craziest team on paper and they've had a really bad year, they have made Winnipeg's life miserable every time they've been played against. So, I don't want to write that one off. But then you've got a couple of games against the Avs. And the Avs are a team that you would absolutely have a good chance of seeing in the playoffs. So that could be a huge barometer test. A road game next week on the 31st against Colorado is a huge opportunity for the Jets to come out swinging. Really sucks that it's the second half of a back-to-back after going through, Winnipeg to take on the Preds. But, hey, you got to, I guess, beat the best to be the best. And sometimes the NHL schedule makers are not going to be your friends. They certainly have not been this year. Really funny that the Colorado squad is also the second half of another back-to-back later in January, but what can you do, right? You just got to get through the schedule, come away with as few injuries as possible. Hopefully Winnipeg gets some reinforcements here over the next few weeks, whether internally or perhaps externally. Maybe there's a trade opportunity, but I think from this upcoming home stretch and what I'm hoping for the rest of the season, I think the Jets are very much primed to play well above 500. They've already played at a crazy points percentage pace already. Don't really see a reason why that shouldn't continue. I am looking forward to, a game here in Washington in a couple of weeks. Would be lovely to see the Jets beat the Caps on the road in Washington. The Caps are one of the top teams in the East and quite honestly one of the top teams in the league, which if you told me that coming into the season, never would have believed it, but here we are in the bizarro 2024-25 season. Anything's possible. And maybe a Jets win in Washington would be a nice way to cap a hopefully pretty successful winter run. But let me know what you're expecting from this run of games. Do you think the Jets are going to be above 500 in terms of the next couple of weeks of hockey? Or do you think that they're going to have maybe a little bit of a dip in form and kind of look a little more mortal? Drop your comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that is going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day. We may be off until later this week. We'll have to see. We may have an episode tomorrow. Haven't really decided. But if not, we will have coverage on Thursday and Friday heading into what should be a very eventful end of December and early January sprint. But like I said, that is all the time that we have for today. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.